In today's video, I'll tell you all about what I loved and what I didn't love about my 7-day cruise on Icon of the Seas. I'll tell you who I think will love this ship and who I think might not. I'll show you places where it's always crowded and places where it's not. I'll tell you about the differences between some of the pools on board and introduce you to the friendliest crew member aboard. It's my review of the largest cruise ship in the world, Icon of the Seas. I'm back at home now after my 7-day cruise on Icon of the Seas. And there were things about the ship that I thought were really great and some things about it that I really didn't like. I'm going to tell you all about it. And I want to tell you right up front that I paid out of my own pocket to be on this cruise. You know, a lot of YouTubers and travel agents that have made videos about Icon were cruising for free at Royal Caribbean's expense, so they're a lot less likely to say anything negative. Royal Caribbean has never offered me a free cruise, so I'll be giving you the real story without any concerns about whether Royal Caribbean likes what I have to say or not. Now, if you disagree with something that I say in this video, or if you think I didn't get something quite right, I want you to be sure to leave me a comment to let me know. And if you think I got it right, please take the time to let me know that too. Okay, so let me start off by saying who I think will love Icon of the Seas, and that's families traveling with children. There were a lot of kids on this cruise, and there was a lot to keep them busy. There's an entire neighborhood on the ship called Surfside, which is a place for younger kids to hang out and have fun. There's lots of things for them to do in the Surfside neighborhood and lots of the types of food that young kids will love. Adults are also encouraged to enjoy the food in the Surfside neighborhood. Now, older kids, your preteens, teenagers, and above, will also love Icon of the Seas, especially the neighborhood known as Thrill Island, which features, among other things, a water park with 6 different very thrilling water slides. And there's no extra charge to use them. My YouTube channel got its first jump start from a cruise ship water slide video that went on to get 94 million views, so I have a special place in my heart for cruise ship water slides, and Icon is the best ship I know if water slides are what you're into. There's also a rock climbing wall, a sports court that can be configured for basketball, soccer, or lots of other different activities that the teens will love. There's miniature golf, a flow rider, and more, as well as casual dining options that kids will love. And if you buy them the soda package, which only costs $10 a day, they will have unlimited access to the Coca-Cola Freestyle machines, which are located all over the ship near the various places that kids like to hang out. Also, if you're going to be doing a multi-generation cruise where you have grandparents, parents, kids, and maybe even a few cousins all cruising together, Icon of the Seas is a fantastic cruise ship for groups like that because there's something for everyone. And there are so many different dining and entertainment options, making it easy to keep everyone in your group happy. Everybody can go off and do their own thing, and then you meet up later for a meal or a show or an excursion. Now, let me tell you who might not like Icon of the Seas as much as families will. If you're looking for a quiet, relaxing cruise, especially if what you like to do on a sea day is to spend time in or around one of the ship's swimming pools and have a quiet and relaxing day, you might not like Icon of the Seas as much because the pools are very busy and it's pretty much a party. But a lot of people like that, so just give some thought to whether you do or not. But right now, let's focus on the things that I loved about Icon of the Seas. And at the top of the list, Royal Caribbean is very well known for having the best, most elaborate Broadway-style shows in their main theaters. On Icon of the Seas, the big blockbuster show is The Wizard of Oz, which stays very true to the classic 1939 film. The sets and the production values were top-notch. This would be considered a great show on Broadway, and you can see it for no additional charge on Icon of the Seas. I loved it. And another show I enjoyed on board at no additional charge was the Aqua Action Show in the Indoor Aqua Theater. The performers display some amazing athletic skills, and the theater itself features some very high-tech gear to enhance the show. I really appreciate seeing a show where lighting and sound are used to maximum effect to create great entertainment. And it's amazing that this is all on a cruise ship. It's a show beyond anything a Broadway theater could ever do. Another show I liked a lot was called Starburst. It's a really good ice skating show that takes place in a multi-purpose room known as Absolute Zero. Not only do they do the professional ice skating shows here in Absolute Zero, but also you can come and show off your own ice skating skills or learn to skate with the help of these little devices that are reminiscent of a metal walker that old guys like me are probably going to need to use someday. The space, Absolute Zero, can also be configured with regular flooring, not ice, for use as a place for game shows or other audience participation events. Another entertainment space that I really like on Icon of the Seas is the Music Hall. This is the place for live rock music. I also saw them do pop songs like ABBA here one night. And they also had a really popular event here on formal night, the Father-Daughter Dance. And also a fun version of Family Feud. It's just too bad that the music hall has kind of a bad location. It's hidden. It would get so much more foot traffic if they had put it right on the Royal Promenade. Dueling Pianos, which is on the upper level of the Royal Promenade, was another nice entertainment option that people seem to really enjoy. There's also a karaoke bar on the Royal Promenade for those who love karaoke. And I totally loved this stand-up comedy show we saw, which featured 3 different comedians. My wife and I love dogs. This is Carly, our Cocker Spaniel. I've had Cockers for most of my life, and for 15 years we were breeders of Cocker Spaniel puppies. So we were beyond excited when we found out that Icon of the Seas has a canine crew member. This is Rover, and she's a very playful golden retriever. She was named Rover because her job is to rove around the ship and socialize with the passengers. That's her handler on the left there, but Rover doesn't belong to her handler or any specific person. She belongs to Royal Caribbean, and she is a permanent crew member on Icon of the Seas. Speaking of dogs, check out this piece of art on the Royal Promenade. I got a kick out of discovering several whimsical artistic creations in various parts of the ship. I especially admired this one. They could have just made this a blank wall, but they went to the trouble of creating these animated scenes in these fake windows. I was impressed. If you've seen pictures or videos of Icon of the Seas from the air, you've probably noticed that big glass dome up at the top front of the ship. Inside, underneath the dome, is a really great, quiet, and relaxing spot on the ship known as the Overlook. It's got fantastic views of what's ahead of the ship, and it's fully air-conditioned to keep it comfortable at all times. There's a bar here if you'd like to sit and enjoy a drink as you take in the views. Another fantastic place to go on the ship when you want to relax in a quiet, peaceful space is Central Park. Of course, this was something people loved about the Oasis-class ships, so Royal Caribbean stuck with it on this new generation of ships too. There are restaurants and bars here in Central Park, and it's just a wonderful place when you want to relax. The ship does also have a thermal suite within the spa with heated tile loungers you can lie down on and relax. There are steam rooms, a sauna, some very nice showers. It's the place to go when you're ready for a spa day. Another thing that really impressed me, Royal Caribbean has absolutely perfected the embarkation and disembarkation process. You'll never have an easier time boarding a cruise ship than you will at Terminal A at the Port of Miami boarding Icon of the Seas. Royal Caribbean spent a ton of money to build the most state-of-the-art cruise terminal here. It opened back in 2018. You'd think the largest cruise ship in the world would have the most crowded and most horrible embarkation imaginable. But no, Royal Caribbean worked really hard to do everything possible to speed the process up. From the time you step out of your lift or taxi that drops you off at the curb in front of Terminal A, it takes you all of maybe 10 minutes to get through the check-in process and through security and onto the gangway that takes you from the cruise terminal and drops you right into the Royal Promenade on Deck 5, where the first thing you'll see will be the Pearl, which surrounds a staircase that leads up to the Pearl Cafe, one of about a dozen different venues that you can have lunch at the first day of the cruise. The disembarkation process at the end of the cruise is just as quick and well organized as the embarkation on day one. Even the process of going through customs at the end of the cruise as you re-enter the United States is the fastest you'll probably ever see. One specific thing I loved about the disembarkation process, if you're sitting in your cabin waiting for your turn to disembark, you will not be bothered by any public address announcements. All the information you need to know is on Channel 2 of your stateroom TV and on a sheet of paper that was delivered to your cabin, so they don't constantly bother you with PA announcements on disembarkation day like they do on most other cruise lines. You will love that Icon has so many different restaurant choices, offering so many different types of food. You have way more options than just the main dining room and the buffet. There are over 20 different places to eat on this ship. There are fancy, elegant dining options, and lots of casual dining options too. Now, my wife and I really prefer to eat at a buffet when we're on a cruise ship, and Icon's buffet offered a wide variety of food every day. Way more variety than the dinner buffet on Carnival, for example. Internet access worked very well for me during the entire week. I was able to watch YouTube videos. I even uploaded a video. Everything felt responsive. There wasn't a lot of lag or latency. The crew members on Icon of the Seas were excellent. The guys at the omelet station in the buffet were our favorites. By about the third or fourth day of the cruise, we didn't even have to tell them what we wanted anymore. They already knew and remembered. My travel agent, Caitlin Gallagher, arranged to have a bottle of sparkling wine waiting for us in our cabin when we got on board to thank me for all the business I've sent her way. If you're thinking about booking a cruise on Icon of the Seas, I definitely recommend booking with Caitlin rather than booking directly through Royal Caribbean. Caitlin is a fantastic resource. She's very knowledgeable about Icon of the Seas. She's already sailed on Icon of the Seas twice, once with her son and another time with her husband. Caitlin is especially knowledgeable of all the different types of staterooms on Icon of the Seas. So if you're going to cruise with kids and you need to know which staterooms have bunk beds or which ones have sofas that convert to beds or beds that drop down out of the ceiling or connecting rooms that are perfect for putting the parents in one room and the kids next door, Caitlin can definitely help you. It's really difficult to figure all that stuff out on your own and to know which are the best options, so get my travel agent on your side. She will make it so much easier for you, and it costs you nothing extra. Her fees are paid by the cruise lines. Caitlin Gallagher, not just a travel agent, but the owner of Ambrin Travel, a multi-million-dollar producing agency and one of the top travel agencies in the USA. Another thing I loved about Icon of the Seas, the cabins have more USB charging ports than I've ever seen on a cruise ship. I think there were 8 in 5 different parts of the room. And not just the older kind, USB-A, it also had several of the newer USB-C ports, too. The design of the shower in my cabin was really great. Not only was that shower large enough to fit 2 people if you wanted to, but also, rather than using a shower curtain, the glass shower door had a really smart design that made it easy to get in and out. And inside the shower, something you don't usually see unless you're staying in a suite, a large bench that you can sit on, store things on, or prop a leg up on for shaving. Another thing I really liked about the design of Icon of the Seas was that they tucked the casino below the Royal Promenade, pretty much out of sight. You never have to go through the casino to get from one part of the ship to another. We were also totally impressed with the Cocoa Beach Club on Royal Caribbean's private island in the Bahamas. This was our first visit to the Cocoa Beach Club, and we loved it. When we go on vacation, my wife and I almost always go somewhere warm because we love spending time at a warm water beach or at a swimming pool with warm water in a quiet, relaxing setting. Now, the pools on the ship were not relaxing. They were crowded, and the music was not only too loud, but it wasn't the right music for us. But the Cocoa Beach Club, oh my gosh, it's like they designed it just for us. Not only quiet and relaxing, but the quality of everything there was elevated. Everything from the outdoor patio furniture to the food they served in their restaurant. I had filet mignon for lunch at the Cocoa Beach Club. My wife had filet too, but also lobster. In the restrooms, no paper towels, cloth towels. And you don't have to bring a beach towel from the ship. They provide them at the Cocoa Beach Club. Now it's time to talk about some of the things I didn't like about Icon of the Seas. While families with kids will enjoy the 4 swimming pools midship, they were way too crowded and full of rowdy kids. For me, I'm a senior citizen. So I appreciated that Royal Caribbean designated the infinity pool at the back end of the ship, which is called the hideaway pool, as being for adults only. But it was one of the only pools that was not heated. At least they didn't heat the water on the week I was aboard. It was a great place to shoot a quick Instagram photo, but the cold water made it a place you didn't want to stay too long. Now, on many other Royal Caribbean ships, they have a pool called the Solarium Pool, which is adults only and is a quiet, relaxing place, not a party pool. But unfortunately, on Icon of the Seas, there's no such thing. The hideaway pool is a party pool for most of the day. They often have a DJ set up his equipment next to the hideaway bar, and he plays really loud music that I didn't like at all. I think it was the type of music known as techno. I really missed the relaxing solarium pools I had experienced on other Royal Caribbean ships. There was one pool on Icon of the Seas that I did notice was less crowded the first couple of days of the cruise, and that's the one known as the Cloud 17 pool. Now, these video clips of it I shot on the last day of the cruise when it was crowded, but the Cloud 17 pool is a little bit hidden. It's up on deck 17, up above the other pools. So I think the first couple of days, people didn't even realize that the Cloud 17 pool was up there. But by the end of the cruise, when I shot these video clips, they had found it, and it was just as crowded as the other pools always were. Another thing I really didn't like about Icon of the Seas was all the upcharges. And it's not that they're trying to nickel and dime you. It felt like they were outright trying to gouge you. They were asking $300 for 1 day's use of one of these daybeds at the Hideaway. $140 for dinner for two at the Steakhouse. $49 for about a 2-minute adventure on Crown's Edge. $160 per kid if your kids want to use the water park at Coco Cay. $2,000 if mom and dad want to hang out in a cabana while the kids are at the water park on Coco Cay. $321 per couple to have high-speed internet access. It cost my wife and I $592 to spend the day at the Cocoa Beach Club. And if we had wanted a cabana there, that would have cost $3,600 for about 8 hours of use. So $450 an hour. That is crazy. Another thing I really didn't like on Icon of the Seas was the closet arrangement in our cabin. Royal Caribbean had it right with the Quantum-class ships and the Oasis-class ships. They had 2 separate closets, one for each person in the cabin, and they spread those 2 closets out far apart from each other so that it was easy for both people to get dressed at the same time without being in each other's way. They should have just used that same arrangement for Icon, but they didn't. They put all the closets together on one side of the bed, making it completely impossible for both people in the room to get things from the closet at the same time. They also only put an electrical outlet on one side of the bed. There's a USB charging port on both sides of the bed, but an actual 110-volt electric outlet only on one side. And at the desk, again, there's lots of USB charging ports, but just one 110-volt electrical outlet. And to make matters worse, they prohibit the use of power strips. They won't even let you bring one on board. In the shower, they didn't bother to include a clothesline. Most cruise ships have a clothesline in the shower so that you can use it to dry your swimsuit overnight. My wife loved that they had a gluten-free station at the buffet, but it was a goofy situation. If she wanted a gluten-free bagel or gluten-free pancakes, those weren't at the gluten-free station. They were at the far other end of the restaurant. And she said the gluten-free pancakes were horrible. I had a similar situation with my breakfast. I loved the made-to-order omelets, but I had to walk halfway across the restaurant to get breakfast potatoes and all the way to the far side of the room to get a donut or a croissant. I loved the cookies that they had in the buffet at lunch and dinner, but they didn't put plates next to the cookies. You had to walk to the other side of the station to find a plate to put your cookies on. Now, I know it's minor stuff, but it tells me that the restaurant manager isn't thinking of things from a passenger's point of view. Something that really surprised me was how uncomfortable so many of the chairs were on board. All throughout the ship, there are lots of chairs and places where you might want to sit down and relax for a while, but so many of the chairs just didn't fit the human body well. Great looking chairs, but not comfortable to sit in. When you sit in the chair with your legs back as far as they could go, your back was just too far away from the back of the chair to be supported. I tried 2 different high-end burgers on Icon of the Seas, a $12 burger at Playmakers, which I'd rate an 8 out of 10, and an $11 burger at Base Camp, which I'd rate a 7 out of 10. But They're just not as good as my gold standard Guy Fieri burgers on Carnival, which are a 10 out of 10 and don't cost anything extra. But don't get me wrong, I am glad that I went on Icon of the Seas. I really enjoyed seeing what they've done with their new class of ships, and I think a lot of people, especially families with children, would have a blast on a cruise on Icon of the Seas. Now, if you are interested in booking a cruise, do yourself a favor and contact my travel agent, Caitlin Gallagher. And not only is she extremely knowledgeable, but smart too. When Royal Caribbean first started accepting reservations for Icon of the Seas, she reserved a bunch of cabins, like 100 or so, all at the original low rates that Royal Caribbean was offering at first. Then over time, Royal Caribbean kept jacking up the rates, and the prices for Icon of the Seas went just through the roof. But Caitlin had all those cabins reserved at the original low rates. So instead of paying $7,000 or $8,000 for my cabin on Icon, like a lot of people did, look at my actual booking confirmation. Only $3,632 for an ocean view balcony cabin, thanks to Caitlin. Now, you've missed that particular deal. As soon as I made a couple of videos about how much lower Caitlin's deals were than what you get by booking direct through Royal Caribbean, those cabins sold out real fast. But if you get in touch with Caitlin right now, she does have some rates that are lower than booking directly with Royal Caribbean, and they come with refundable deposits too on certain dates in 2024 and 2025, including some deals for Christmas week this year and New Year's week. But those will be gone soon. I think it's worth calling Caitlin, and she's really easy to talk to because she's not in a call center outside of the U.S. She works from her home in Florida, and if she happens to be busy when you call, she has other agents that work for her too. If you disagree with something I said in this video, or if you think I didn't get something quite right, please be sure to leave me a comment to let me know about it. And if you think I did get it right, please take the time to let me know that too, or at least click the thumbs up button. I'm Jim Zim. Thanks for watching.